A while back, the CBB channel, otherwise known as the artist formerly known as Captain Blackpill, whom I've had on once on this channel, sometime last year, if I recall, made a rather long stream, about an hour, talking about Kevin Samuels, among other things. But towards the end, he talked about JBW and Southeast Asia. Just be white, go to Southeast Asia, geomaxing, living the dream. And to put this in a bit of context, the artist formerly known as Captain Blackpill has been doing very well in the corporate world, making lots of money. He's quite well off financially, right? But the sense he was conveying was he was quite bored with the situation in Kangaroo Land where he lives, and that he is seriously entertaining Just Be White in Southeast Asia, i.e. JBW, geomaxing, just to see what it's like. And he didn't say this in a vacuum. He talked a little about the Manosphere, how everyone just is behind a screen talking about these things but doesn't do anything. And for some reason, he brought my name up. And although he probably doesn't know or didn't know, he assumed that basically the entirety of my existence of almost 50 years on Earth, I've just been talking behind a screen. And that's just not true. I'm somebody who's actually traveled quite extensively. I've been everywhere except Australia and Antarctica, essentially, or Oceania, rather, New Zealand as well. I haven't been there. And I've lived in a fairly large number of countries. And I also speak a few languages to varying degrees. So it's not like I haven't been around the bend. I have, actually, far more than the average person, certainly far more than the so-called average American, right? So what I want to talk about today is this notion of getting things out of your system, because I really think that's what gets to the heart of the issue here. In the case of the artist formerly known as Captain Blackpill, he feels, based on what I could gather from the video, that he's stuck in a rut, and that, sure, he's making good money, he's wealthy, he's whatever, but he needs to experience something else before he gets too old, because he's in his 30s. And I can certainly understand that. But a lot of the issues that people face in the Manosphere, especially the younger generation, the Zoomers, as they're called, are issues that are related to getting things out of your system. When you think about the ultimate quest for box, right? Got to chase that box, right? Got to get your pee-pee wet. Got to do all these things, right? Books max, wealth max. It's all to acquire a set of experiences. Initially, yes, to get your pee-pee wet if you haven't done that. Eventually you realize, okay, you've boinked a couple of women, box is okay, but it's maybe not that amazing, but it's pretty good, yeah. And then you set your sights on sort of longer term relationships. Maybe there's something else going on there, right? Beyond just the box phenomenon. And that's a perfectly reasonable thought to have, because really, when you're young especially, but in general, if you haven't had certain key experiences, then you will crave them, especially if the outside world makes a big deal of it. And that's absolutely true of sex and box in general, and just relationships with women. This idea that, and I've talked about this a number of times, that you could make anything scarce enough to make it hyper desirable. And my famous example, of course, is pineapple ham pizza. In a world where pineapple ham pizza were exceedingly rare and cost untold amounts of money to eat and consume, that could be pedestalized as well. And as a consequence, people would think, I really, really need to eat it. Oh, it's so amazing. And people would be chasing that too. I mean, there's some biology at play, obviously, quite a bit when it comes to sex and sexual relations. But you get my point here, I think. And so fundamentally, the situation of the artist formerly known as Captain Blackpill is not that different. Sure, he's had a number of sexual escapades, blah, 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 but he's never really been outside of Oceania. He's really from New Zealand, lives in Kangaroo Land. Okay. And so I get that. People need to get things out of their system. But there's a flip side to this. Although I think it's perfectly normal and probably a worthwhile pursuit to get certain key experiences out of your system, you don't need to get every experience out of your system. And I think a lot of it comes down to your individual personality, right? And so, for example, not too long ago, the Baron of Brooklyn, the Lord of Gingers, the Slayer of Tax Dragons, the Scion of Dogda, none other than Pete, that guy you refused to invite to gatherings, made a video about risk aversion and how he's very, very risk averse. Now you take somebody like Pete and you say, well, would this guy benefit from geomaxing and traveling the globe and seeing everything? Well, probably not, because it would trigger his risk aversion. It would make him feel less secure. It would make him feel worse than he otherwise would have. And so it's one thing to feel kind of bored in your lifestyle, your life circumstances, but it's an entirely different thing to feel compelled to do things because, put it this way, there's a certain degree of social societal pressure. Now, obviously, there's a natural, innate libido thing going on, particularly for men. And so they're naturally driven to want to boink women and seek out box. However, is some of this inflated by the world we live in and the social circumstances that we grow into? Absolutely. There's no question. And I think every guy has this experience of losing your quote-unquote virginity, right? And then thinking to yourself, was that it, right? That is a very common experience. It's not the only experience, but more often than not, it comes down to that. Oh, really? That's all it was? And so geomaxing, see another example. Maybe that's something you really feel compelled to do. But I always say you should really consider why it is you want to do it. Before geomaxing was a thing, I was traveling a lot. I was living in different countries. But I wasn't geomaxing. I wasn't doing it for that reason. I, frankly speaking, fled the United States. I absolutely despise the United States. I hate just about everything about it, with one exception, and that's condiments. There are many, many excellent, low-calorie, even calorie-free condiments available in the United States that you cannot get in Europe or elsewhere. But I pretty much hate the United States in every other respect. And I hated the city I came from. And so I really, really wanted to get out. It was effectively a compulsion. Being stuck there would have made me even more miserable than I already am. And so there's that kind of get it out of your system where you kind of know you have to leave. And so I think in a lot of ways, my example is much more an example of internal compulsion than it is external compulsion. But I think it's important to weigh this out in your own head and try to line it up with your own personality. Again, I bring up Pete because he talked about this on his channel. For somebody who's really, really risk averse, traveling even into the next state, let alone getting on an airplane and seeing the world and doing all these sorts of things, is something that is extremely, extremely frightening and probably just not worth the effort. And the other thing is this: what will you lose in the process in pursuing these things that you simply need to get out of your system? In my case, I lost almost nothing, which is to say, I hated the United States. There was nothing there for me. And so leaving the place was almost exclusively beneficial. But on the other hand, if you have a lot of good things going for you, so for example, Pete, as you know, has a very nice setup. You know, he has a good job. He's got his family. He's got friends. All this. Why would you give that up just to geomax? What's the point, right? If the alternative is far worse, then it becomes less a question of getting it out of your system and much more a question of why it is you're pursuing these things. I think that's ultimately the question that needs to be posed, both to the individual deciding to pursue these things and just in general. Why do you need to get it out of your system? Because I do think in some cases you can just rationalize it away. Sure, if you have the libido going, you might want to get your pee-pee wet. That's fine. If it's really that important to you, right, then hire an escort, right? Get it over with. And then you don't have to think about it anymore. That's really what you're after. The whole travel thing and living abroad, I think is highly overrated unless you're doing it for the right reasons. And the right reasons are very variable. I'm not trying to create some sort of formula here. But for example, let's say you hate the country that you were born in, like I do. Well, you probably want to leave if you can. And I got lucky enough to be able to. But if you kind of like your life, like the artist formerly known as Coach Blackpill, and you earn good money and you have a comfortable setup, why would you just leave that behind and then just deracinate yourself to go traveling for reasons, right? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I'm not saying he shouldn't do that, but then again, the grass is always greener on the other side. So in the final analysis, I think it is important to ask yourself why you feel compelled to do things to quote-unquote get them out of your system. Sometimes it's purely biological, though rarely, but even the biological stuff is reinforced by the social setting that you find yourself in. And I think this is not something people ask themselves oftentimes, especially the younger generation. For example, these Zoomers that are so obsessed with looks maxing and getting GFs and what have you, how much of that is just pure biology, and how much of that is the inflation of the innate biological desire that's being passed on to them by marketing people, by bathrobe man, etc., etc. All these people pushing them in a certain direction. Maybe because they otherwise wouldn't feel like they have a direction. That's possible too. But even so, how much of it is internal? How much of it is external? Sure, there's a biological basis, but is that really the best thing you can be doing with your time? And is it a primary absolute? Do you absolutely have to get out of your system? And then what? Because if you think about somebody like Bathrobe Man has achieved certain things, right? What is he going to be doing 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Is he still going to be talking about Jeffrey and have his memes? Probably not. He'll have to evolve in some respect, intellectually or cognitively, and there'll have to be something else to talk about. And he'll probably realize eventually that this whole chasing box status, although some guys never lose sight of this, is probably an effort in vain. Or maybe he won't. Like I said, some guys never lose sight of it. These days, humans are all too susceptible to external messages coming from other people. Notice, I'm not telling you, whether you're young or old, to do anything with your life. Think about it, evaluate it, think about your personality, and whether or not your personality is compatible with something like geomaxing and traveling the world or what have you. It might very well not be. So these are things that really need to be considered before you decide to pursue these compulsions that you feel to quote-unquote get it out of your system. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Please engage in all that delightful YouTube jazz. As I've stated many times, my channel is definitely being throttled, so please hit the bell icon to be informed of my videos. Hit the like button, show you appreciate the video, share the video, write comments, subscribe if you're not a subscriber, tell other people about my videos. That would also be quite fabulous. And if I am still alive, I will check you out later. Until the next time, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.